The morning show host held up the cream-colored envelope with trembling hands as she addressed the boxing legend sitting across from her in the NBC studio. Her announcement that this special letter had arrived from Ibrahim Traoré, president of Burkina Faso, created an immediate hush throughout the studio as everyone present sensed they were about to witness something unprecedented in television history. Mike Tyson, the former heavyweight champion whose fearsome reputation had dominated boxing for decades, accepted the envelope with visibly shaking hands while asking with genuine confusion who this African leader was and why he would be writing to him personally. Nobody in that moment could have predicted that this simple letter would transform one of the most feared athletes in human history into a vulnerable human being whose tears would flow freely on live television, creating an emotional connection that would bridge two continents and unite two wounded souls who had found strength through their shared experiences of pain and redemption. The NBC studio in New York had been hosting routine morning programming when Mike Tyson arrived to promote his new autobiography and upcoming Netflix documentary. At 58 years old, the former champion appeared confident and composed, displaying the same intimidating presence that had made him a household name throughout the 1980s and 1990s. However, this particular morning would prove to be anything but ordinary, as it would reveal depths of vulnerability and humanity that the public had never witnessed from the man once known as the most dangerous fighter on the planet. Host Janet Miller carefully placed the letter on the table and began opening it with deliberate precision, explaining that this correspondence had arrived the previous evening from West Africa, specifically from the president of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré, who had written it exclusively for Mike Tyson but had graciously granted permission for it to be read during the live broadcast if the champion consented to sharing its contents with the viewing audience. Mike's initial confusion about Burkina Faso's location and his complete unfamiliarity with Ibrahim Traoré reflected the vast cultural and geographical distances that separated these two men, making the emotional connection that was about to unfold all the more remarkable and unexpected. His casual agreement to have the letter read aloud demonstrated his complete lack of preparation for the profound impact that these words from an unknown African leader would have on his emotional well-being and public persona. Janet began reading the letter with careful attention to its emotional weight, her voice carrying the gravity of words that had traveled thousands of miles to reach their intended recipient. The opening lines immediately established an intimate tone as Ibrahim Traoré identified himself not as a political figure but as a young boy who had once watched Mike Tyson fight on a flickering television screen in a crowded room, setting the stage for a deeply personal connection that transcended their vastly different life circumstances and geographical origins. The letter's revelation that Mike had represented proof rather than mere entertainment struck the first emotional chord, as Traoré explained how the young boxer had demonstrated that pain could be transformed into power and that a boy from nowhere could stand before giants and defeat them. This profound observation about Mike's symbolic significance went far beyond his athletic achievements to encompass his role as an inspiration for marginalized youth around the world who saw their own struggles reflected in his journey from poverty and abandonment to global recognition and success. As Janet continued reading, Mike's posture began to change noticeably, his previously casual demeanor shifting to intense focus as he leaned forward with sharpening attention to every word being spoken. The letter's description of how Traoré remembered Mike's eyes rather than his fists during crucial moments of leadership crisis revealed the depth of observation and emotional intelligence that had enabled the African leader to draw strength from the boxer's example during his own moments of doubt and difficulty. The most powerful section of the letter described how Ibrahim had recalled Mike's eyes during times when his own country was suffering, specifically noting the pain, fire, and refusal to be broken that he had observed in those televised moments decades earlier. This section demonstrated how athletic performance could transcend entertainment to become a source of philosophical and spiritual guidance for leaders facing overwhelming challenges in their efforts to serve their people and maintain hope during desperate circumstances. When Janet read the letter's concluding gratitude for teaching the lesson of rising not as a fighter but as a man, Mike's emotional defenses completely collapsed as he stood up abruptly and requested that the reading be stopped immediately. The tears that began flowing represented more than simple emotional response. They embodied the release of decades of accumulated pain, isolation, and misunderstanding that had characterized much of his public and private existence. Mike's desperate whisper that someone had truly seen him rather than his knockouts or fame revealed the profound loneliness that had characterized his life despite global recognition and massive wealth. His breakdown demonstrated how rare and precious genuine human recognition had been in his experience, making Ibrahim's words all the more powerful and transformative in their ability to reach the wounded child that still existed within the world's most feared athlete. The studio's complete silence as Mike wept openly created an unprecedented moment in television history as viewers witnessed the complete vulnerability of someone who had spent his entire adult life projecting invincibility and intimidation. The decision not to cut away from his tears reflected the production team's recognition that they were documenting something historically significant that needed to be preserved and shared with the world. Mike's confession about being 14 years old, homeless, and suicidal provided crucial context for understanding how Ibrahim's letter had penetrated so deeply into his psyche, revealing the desperate circumstances that had driven him toward boxing as the only means of receiving attention and validation from a world that had otherwise ignored or dismissed his existence and value as a human being. His explanation that fighting had represented the only way anyone would look at him illuminated the tragic foundation of his boxing career and the emotional emptiness that had characterized even his greatest triumphs and achievements. The revelation that someone halfway across the world had watched him and become inspired to achieve leadership positions provided a redemptive framework for understanding his career's deeper significance beyond mere athletic entertainment. The commercial break provided Mike with a brief opportunity to compose himself, but his continued emotional state demonstrated the profound impact that Ibrahim's words had created in unlocking decades of suppressed feelings and unresolved psychological pain. His decision to continue the interview despite his emotional vulnerability reflected his recognition that this moment represented something larger than personal embarrassment or temporary emotional release. When the cameras resumed rolling, the absence of any prepared script or promotional agenda created space for authentic human connection and genuine emotional expression that transformed a routine celebrity interview into a profound meditation on pain, recognition, and redemption that would resonate with viewers around the world who had experienced their own struggles with isolation and misunderstanding. Mike's direct address to Ibrahim Traoré, despite never having met him, reflected the immediate sense of kinship and understanding that the letter had created between these two men who had experienced similar trajectories from childhood trauma to positions of global influence and responsibility. His description of holding the letter like something sacred demonstrated the reverence he felt for words that had acknowledged his humanity in ways that decades of media coverage and public attention had failed to achieve. His confession about not being supposed to survive his youth provided additional context for understanding the miraculous nature of his continued existence and eventual success, while his acknowledgement of having been a thief and fighter before experiencing love illustrated the desperate circumstances that had shaped his early development and continued to influence his adult relationships and self-perception. The studio audience's complete attention to his words reflected their recognition that they were witnessing something unprecedented in celebrity culture. A moment of complete authenticity and vulnerability from someone whose public persona had been carefully constructed around invincibility and intimidation. His statement that nobody discusses the pain, hunger, and nights of praying not to wake up provided voice to experiences that millions of viewers had shared but rarely heard acknowledged by public figures. His concluding observation that Ibrahim's letter had demonstrated he was not alone in his suffering created a universal message about the power of recognition and understanding to heal psychological wounds that had persisted for decades despite material success and global recognition. This realization transformed his individual pain into a shared human experience that could inspire others facing similar struggles with abandonment, trauma, and emotional isolation. Simultaneously, thousands of miles away in his modest presidential office in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré was watching the live broadcast in solitude, his security team maintaining respectful distance to allow him private space to process this unprecedented moment of international connection and mutual recognition. The dim lighting and buzzing ceiling fan created an intimate atmosphere that contrasted sharply with the high-technology television studio where Mike was experiencing his emotional breakthrough. When Ibrahim witnessed Mike's tears, his own emotional response demonstrated the depth of empathy and connection that had motivated him to write the original letter, reflecting his understanding that authentic leadership required the courage to acknowledge vulnerability and create space for healing rather than simply projecting strength and authority to maintain political power and public confidence. His whispered acknowledgement in French that Mike had truly felt the letter's message revealed his own surprise and satisfaction at the success of his attempt to reach across cultural and geographical barriers to provide comfort and recognition to someone whose example had sustained him during his own moments of doubt and difficulty as a young leader facing overwhelming challenges. The wall decorations in Ibrahim's office, featuring photographs of children in dusty schools, farmers, nurses, and soldiers rather than political dignitaries, reflected his commitment to remaining connected to the people he served rather than becoming isolated within political hierarchies and international diplomatic circles. The small framed photograph of young Mike Tyson positioned among these images demonstrated the personal significance that the boxer's example had held throughout Ibrahim's own journey from poverty to political leadership. His assistant's interruption with news about the United Nations' renewed interest in discussing his education reforms illustrated how this moment of human connection was occurring within the broader context of his political responsibilities and international recognition as an innovative leader. However, his decision to postpone political discussions in favor of authentic human truth reflected his understanding that genuine leadership required prioritizing emotional and spiritual authenticity over strategic political considerations. The viral spread of the interview within hours of its broadcast demonstrated the universal hunger for authentic human connection and emotional truth in a media landscape typically dominated by manufactured content and strategic messaging. The sharing of clips across social media platforms by celebrities, schools, and refugee camps in Africa reflected the broad appeal of this moment of genuine human vulnerability and cross-cultural understanding. The international phone call that Mike received after midnight represented the continuation of this extraordinary connection, as Ibrahim reached out personally to establish direct communication and express his own gratitude for the courage that Mike had demonstrated throughout his career and particularly during the emotional television appearance. The late-night timing reflected the urgency and importance that both men attached to maintaining and developing this unexpected relationship. The conversation that followed transcended typical diplomatic or celebrity interactions, as both men spoke from positions of shared understanding about survival, trauma, and the responsibility that comes with public platforms and international recognition. Their exchange of gratitude reflected mutual recognition of how each had contributed to the other's journey toward healing and purposeful leadership. Ibrahim's invitation for Mike to visit Burkina Faso represented more than diplomatic courtesy. It embodied his vision of how their connection could be transformed into meaningful action that would benefit the young people in his country who were facing many of the same challenges that both men had experienced during their own difficult childhoods and adolescent years. Mike's acceptance of this invitation reflected his recognition that this relationship represented an opportunity for redemption and meaningful contribution that went far beyond his boxing achievements or entertainment value. His understanding that the visit would be about hope rather than fighting demonstrated his readiness to embrace a new role as a healing presence rather than simply an intimidating figure. Mike's sleepless night following the phone conversation with Ibrahim reflected the profound impact that this connection had created in his understanding of his own life's purpose and significance. His repeated reading of the letter revealed his need to fully absorb and internalize the recognition and validation that Ibrahim's words had provided after decades of feeling misunderstood and isolated despite global fame and financial success. The specific line about fighting with hunger rather than gloves at age 13 resonated deeply with Mike's own memories of stealing food from corner stores in Brooklyn, confronting bullies who threatened his survival, and experiencing incarceration in juvenile facilities where his potential for both destruction and greatness had been recognized by the trainer who would eventually guide him toward boxing success and international recognition. His decision to tear up his existing schedule and fly immediately to Burkina Faso demonstrated his recognition that this opportunity for meaningful connection and contribution superseded any commercial or professional obligations that his management team had arranged. His explanation that the trip was about the children both men had been rather than their current adult accomplishments reflected his understanding of the deeper purpose that their relationship could serve. Mike's arrival in Ouagadougou without red carpets or paparazzi created the authentic atmosphere necessary for genuine human connection rather than manufactured media spectacle. The spontaneous celebration by barefoot children running alongside his car demonstrated the universal appeal of his story and the inspiration that his example provided for young people facing their own struggles with poverty and limited opportunities. President Traoré's greeting at the modest government house without cameras or rehearsed presentations established the tone for their in-person interaction as one focused on authentic human connection rather than political or promotional objectives. Their extended handshake reflected the depth of mutual respect and understanding that had developed through their letter exchange and phone conversation. Their decision to discuss pain rather than politics demonstrated their shared understanding that genuine leadership and meaningful connection required acknowledgement of vulnerability and suffering rather than projection of invincibility and success. This approach created space for the kind of authentic exchange that would prove healing for both men, while also providing inspiration for others facing similar challenges. The visit to the rural school with broken walls but loud laughter provided the perfect setting for Mike to connect with young people whose circumstances mirror his own childhood experiences of poverty, abandonment, and limited opportunities. The boy with the swollen eye from a street fight represented the countless young people around the world who were following similar paths of violence and desperation that Mike himself had once traveled. Mike's decision to sit on the floor beside this boy and share his own experience while offering wisdom about the strongest punch being the one not thrown demonstrated his transformation from intimidating figure to healing presence. His gesture of allowing the boy to hold his championship ring created a moment of connection that transcended material wealth to provide hope and inspiration for a different kind of future. Ibrahim's parallel contribution to this moment, kneeling beside them to offer his own wisdom about being defined by spirit rather than scars, demonstrated the collaborative nature of their healing ministry and their shared commitment to providing young people with alternative narratives about strength, success, and personal worth that went beyond violence and intimidation. The tears shared by both the boy and Mike reflected the universal human need for recognition, understanding, and hope that transcended cultural, economic, and geographical barriers. This moment illustrated how authentic leadership could create space for healing and transformation through simple presence and genuine care, rather than complex political programs or expensive interventions. Their evening conversation on the rooftop overlooking the glowing lights of quiet Burkina Faso provided the setting for even deeper connection as Ibrahim shared the letters written by children across the country who had been inspired by Mike's story and wanted to express their own hopes and struggles. This collection of correspondence demonstrated how individual acts of courage and vulnerability could create ripple effects that touched countless lives across vast distances. Mike's overwhelming emotional response to reading these letters from African children reflected his recognition that his life struggles and public journey had created meaning and inspiration far beyond his personal healing or professional achievements. His declaration that these letters were worth more than championship belts demonstrated his evolving understanding of what constituted true success and lasting value. Ibrahim's observation that pain connected them more than fame ever could provided the philosophical framework for understanding their relationship and its potential impact on others facing similar struggles with trauma, isolation, and the search for meaning and purpose in their own difficult circumstances and limited opportunities. The specific letter from 11-year-old Maddie about his soldier father who had drawn courage from watching Mike's fights provided a particularly poignant example of how athletic performance could transcend entertainment to provide emotional and spiritual sustenance for families facing loss and tragedy. The boy's acknowledgement that even lions cry created a powerful metaphor for the strength that comes from accepting and expressing vulnerability, rather than suppressing or denying emotional pain. Mike's recognition of his own experience at age 11, watching his mother fade away while feeling that the world had no place for boys like him, demonstrated how these letters had unlocked his capacity for empathy and connection with others who had faced similar losses and abandonment. His whispered repetition of the phrase, "Even lions cry," reflected his acceptance of a new understanding of strength that included rather than excluded emotional expression and human vulnerability. The decision to drive 2 hours through dusty roads to meet Maddie personally demonstrated both men's commitment to transforming their connection into meaningful action that would provide hope and healing for the specific young people who had been touched by their example. This journey through rural Burkina Faso provided additional context for understanding the poverty and limited opportunities that characterize the daily reality for millions of African children. Maddie's reaction to meeting Mike reflected the awe and inspiration that authentic courage and vulnerability could create in young people who were struggling with their own experiences of loss and fear. His treasured photograph of his soldier father demonstrated the importance of having examples of courage and sacrifice to provide guidance during difficult times. The exchange between Mike and Maddie about crying created a powerful moment of mutual recognition and validation that challenged traditional concepts of masculine strength and emotional expression. Mike's acknowledgement that he also cried provided permission for the boy to accept his own emotional responses as normal and healthy, rather than signs of weakness or failure. The spontaneous hug that followed represented more than physical affection. It embodied the kind of human connection that both participants desperately needed for their own healing and growth. Mike's complete emotional breakdown in response to this embrace demonstrated how receiving unconditional acceptance and love could unlock years of suppressed grief and longing for genuine human connection. The respectful distance maintained by cameras and crew during this moment reflected recognition that some experiences of human connection were too sacred and authentic to be exploited for entertainment or promotional purposes. President Traoré's emotional response, standing nearby with hand over heart and glassy eyes, demonstrated his own understanding of the healing power that was being activated through this simple but profound encounter. Mike's promise to return to visit Maddie again reflected his recognition that this relationship represented an ongoing commitment rather than a single moment of connection. His sincere intention to maintain this relationship demonstrated his transformation from someone seeking validation to someone capable of providing stability and support for others facing similar challenges. The subsequent interviews that Mike gave upon returning to America reflected his complete transformation in understanding his own life's purpose and significance. His explanation that he had been healed by an 11-year-old boy challenged conventional concepts of who provides healing and who receives it, while also illustrating how authentic human connection could transcend traditional hierarchies of age, power, and cultural background. His decision to share Maddie's letter on live television and repeat the phrase, "Even lions cry," demonstrated his commitment to using his platform to challenge traditional concepts of masculine strength and emotional expression. The complete silence that followed in the studio reflected the audience's recognition that they were witnessing something unprecedented in celebrity culture and public discourse about vulnerability and authentic leadership. Mike's declaration that he had met children who had lost everything yet possessed more heart than most champions he had ever known provided a new framework for understanding strength and success that prioritized emotional resilience and capacity for love over physical prowess or material achievement. His direct address to Ibrahim Traoré through the television camera created another moment of public vulnerability and gratitude that reinforced their relationship while also inspiring viewers around the world. The universal emotional response to this interview, with viewers across different continents crying, smiling, and feeling hope they hadn't experienced in years, demonstrated the profound hunger for authentic human connection and meaningful leadership that existed in communities around the world. This response validated both men's decision to share their vulnerability publicly and illustrated how individual courage could create collective healing and inspiration. The continuation of their relationship through subsequent phone calls, visits, and collaborative projects demonstrated how authentic human connection could transcend initial moments of recognition to create lasting partnerships for meaningful social change and individual healing. Their joint commitment to supporting young people facing trauma and limited opportunities created a model for how public figures could use their platforms and resources for genuine service rather than self-promotion. Ibrahim's invitation for Mike to speak to the youth of Burkina Faso about rising from nothing reflected his understanding of how their shared story could provide hope and practical guidance for young people facing their own struggles with poverty, abandonment, and limited opportunities. Mike's enthusiastic acceptance of this invitation demonstrated his readiness to embrace a new role as a healer and teacher, rather than simply an entertainer or celebrity figure. The school assembly in Ouagadougou, where Mike shared his story with hundreds of students, created another opportunity for authentic connection and healing as he described his journey from weapon to human being, from suppressed pain to expressed vulnerability, and from isolation to meaningful relationship. His direct engagement with individual students demonstrated his genuine care for their well-being and future prospects. The emotional response of the students, particularly the boys who began crying when they witnessed Mike's own tears, created a collective moment of healing and permission for emotional expression that challenged cultural norms about masculine strength and vulnerability. This shared experience illustrated how authentic leadership could create safe spaces for others to acknowledge and express their own pain and hope. President Traoré's observation from the back of the room that this represented a revolution of hearts rather than simply a speech reflected his understanding of how authentic human connection could transform communities and individuals more effectively than political programs or economic interventions. His own tears demonstrated how witnessing healing in others could activate personal growth and emotional release. Their evening conversation under the stars provided another opportunity for deeper connection as they processed the day's experiences and reflected on the deeper meaning of their relationship and shared mission. Mike's question about why Ibrahim had written the original letter created space for even deeper understanding of the motivations and hopes that had initiated their extraordinary connection. Ibrahim's explanation that he had seen the boy behind the fighter and believed the world still needed him reflected his sophisticated understanding of human potential and the importance of recognizing and nurturing the wounded child that exists within every adult, regardless of their public achievements or apparent strength and success. His additional observation that Mike reminded his people that strength comes from rising repeatedly after being knocked down rather than avoiding defeat altogether provided a philosophical framework for understanding resilience and courage that applied to both boxing and life circumstances. This wisdom demonstrated how athletic metaphors could provide practical guidance for navigating personal and collective challenges. Their handshake that transformed into a clasp of brotherhood reflected the depth of mutual respect and affection that had developed through their shared vulnerability and commitment to healing others who faced similar struggles with trauma, abandonment, and limited opportunities for growth and success. The viral spread of photographs and videos from Mike's school visit demonstrated how authentic acts of compassion and vulnerability could inspire hope and healing far beyond their immediate participants. The global response of viewers crying while watching clips of Mike hugging children and telling them they mattered reflected the universal hunger for recognition, validation, and hope that existed in communities around the world. Mike's transformation from boxing legend to healer and Ibrahim's recognition as a leader who listened to hearts rather than simply exercising political power demonstrated how authentic human connection could reshape public perceptions and create new models for understanding success, leadership, and meaningful contribution to human welfare and community development. The follow-up television interview where Mike returned to the studio where everything had started provided an opportunity to reflect on how profoundly both he and his understanding of his life's purpose had been transformed through this relationship with Ibrahim and the young people of Burkina Faso. His appearance of looking older and wiser reflected the internal growth that had occurred through embracing vulnerability and meaningful service. His simple response that a child and a president had changed him the most demonstrated how authentic human connection could create more profound transformation than years of therapy, religious practice, or self-help programs. The drawing from Maddie that he shared with a television audience provided tangible evidence of how their relationship had created hope and healing for specific individuals while also inspiring broader social change. The studio's complete silence in response to Mike's description of Maddie's transformation from wanting to fight to wanting to grow reflected recognition that they were witnessing something unprecedented in celebrity culture and public discourse about violence, healing, and the possibility for personal transformation regardless of circumstances or background. Mike's final emotional declaration that the boy had given him peace while Traoré had given him purpose provided a succinct summary of how authentic human connection could address the deepest human needs for both inner tranquility and meaningful contribution to others' welfare and development. The second letter from Ibrahim that arrived after the show provided additional confirmation of their ongoing relationship and shared commitment to healing and hope. Ibrahim's description of himself as simply a man who dreams of healing and peace rather than emphasizing his political position demonstrated his understanding that authentic leadership required humility and genuine care for others' welfare rather than pursuit of power or recognition. His acknowledgement that Mike's visit had reminded everyone that pain could be a beginning rather than an ending if people dared to feel rather than fight it provided philosophical wisdom that applied to both individual healing and collective social transformation. This insight demonstrated how personal growth could contribute to broader social change and community development. The information that Maddie now slept peacefully provided concrete evidence of how their relationship had created healing and hope for specific individuals, while also illustrating how adult courage and vulnerability could provide the safety and security that traumatized children needed for healthy development and growth. Mike's whispered prayer for every broken child in the world and every leader with a heart demonstrated how his individual healing had expanded into universal compassion and concern for others facing similar struggles with trauma, abandonment, and limited opportunities for growth and meaningful contribution. His final realization that he had never been the baddest man on the planet, but simply a boy waiting to be heard, provided the perfect conclusion to his journey from intimidating figure to healed healer, while also illustrating how authentic recognition and understanding could transform individual identity and purpose in ways that created ripple effects of healing and hope for countless others facing their own struggles with pain and isolation.